Hi everyone, just before we get into this episode of Type 1 I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for pressing play. I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, don't forget to hit subscribe and you'll be notified when new episodes come about. You can find us across podcast land on Spotify, iTunes, all those good places as well. Secondly, anything you hear on this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. I am, of course, not a professional, and you do need to seek advice from your healthcare team before making any changes to your diabetes management. And lastly, if you want to say hello, I do have an Instagram page specifically for the Type 1 podcast. You can find it at Studio Type 1. That's at Studio Type 1, the number, on 1, the number. And you can also come and say hello and follow me on my personal page, which is at Miss Jen Greaves. And all of that will be noted in the episode description. Hi everyone, and welcome to Type 1, a podcast that delves into the obscure, complex and challenging world of life with Type 1 diabetes. I'm Jen Greaves, and each week, with the help of some brilliant guests, I'll be showing that there is no normal when it comes to handling this whopper of a chronic condition, because we're all pretty much figuring out the messiness of day-to-day life with diabetes as we go. And most of all, even though it doesn't always feel like it, we are absolutely not alone. Dr Monika Sharma is an NHS GP and content creator. After many years of following what could be considered a traditional path in the medical profession, Dr Monika began to question whether there was another way to show up as a GP that would give her more autonomy and better serve her own health and well-being, which ties in rather nicely, as today we're going to be digging into all things cortisol, hormones and stress. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this from someone with so much expertise and sort of personal kind of experience in carving your own path and making sure that you're looking after yourself. So welcome, Dr. Monika, to Type 1.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so happy to have you here today. How are you? Where are you between the 5 to 9 and the 9 to 5, as I know you've kind of reshaped things for yourself?
Yes, I am well. Thank you very much. I am working from home today, which works out well for me. So I'm not having a mad morning routine, which means I'm starting off a little bit more balanced this morning, which is great.
Yeah, that's such a kind of beautiful way to start, isn't it? Where you're just like, oh, I've actually managed to take a breath this morning.
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes I'm literally on autopilot in the morning and I forget
Yeah.
to actually just take a step back and be like, okay, I'm not going to get this morning again. So maybe I should just try and enjoy one thing from it.
Oh, I love that so much. Gosh, I'm taking that away already. Okay, thank you. Podcast is done.
Love it.
We've fixed it all. Yeah, I was just really struck by your message when I came across you online. And I think, it may be a little bit selfish because in a slightly different way and in a different field, I stepped out of a 9 to 5 myself and went freelance, which was in part to do with my health needs, my health condition. And I was struck by how you kind of share parts of your health journey, not just showing life as a GP, but life as a GP as a human being. And I think as someone who has a lot of touch points with the medical profession, it's so easy to go into those appointments and be like, what do I need from this? But I think you can sort of talk me through this a bit, but for me, it feels like you're kind of leveling that playing field of any perceived or true hierarchy in terms of, we're all out here trying our best and we're all works in progress. So can you talk to me just a little bit before we get into kind of the cortisol and the hormones, like what prompted you to start reimagining this, and also what prompted you to start sharing that as well?
Yeah, I think I haven't actually taken time to kind of reflect on the kind of pivotal point until recently. But I think over time, obviously, from a young age, I kind of geared myself up to do medicine. And I think in my head, the expectation of what I was going to be doing wasn't really matching the reality when I started doing the job. And kind of the stereotype of a doctor was someone who kind of spent every living, breathing moment at work and didn't really have a life outside of their job. And I feel like, growing up when I would see, healthcare professionals, I would kind of just see them as very professional in the workplace, nothing else outside. And I realized during my training as a resident doctor that I was really sacrificing parts of myself for my job in terms of, just not enjoying my life outside, because
Mm.
whether I was at work, working long hours, night shifts, or I was just too tired and fatigued. And then, as I became a GP and now I'm kind of self-employed, I had a bit more autonomy over my time. And it almost felt like a luxury, like I was able to choose how my day went. Like I could choose clinic hours, I could choose whether I started later because I wanted to go to a class in the morning. And I kind of almost felt a bit like a fraud. And I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't deserve this luxury because I don't
Mm.
see anybody else having it. And I feel like, at the beginning when I was doing lots of clinical sessions, I felt like I couldn't give what I wanted to my patients because I was just so tired. I was mentally exhausted and I wasn't really filling up my cup outside of work. And so I kind of tried to play around with it. And now I'm showing it online and showing that you can have a life outside of your job, and hopefully slowly trying to change that narrative.
Yeah, it's really interesting though what you say about that structure that's just kind of the standard, but actually in truth it's not really serving anyone, yourself or the people that you're trying to help. And
Mm.
how has that been, that transition? Do you feel like you've got more time like to consider who you are in all of this, or just more autonomy in your day to, as you say, do things that actually then do benefit the people that you're serving in your work?
Yeah, I still sometimes kind of find myself like pinching myself and thinking like, is this my reality? Because I still can't believe that some days I'm able to kind of choose something outside of a 9 to 5, or like an 8 to 6, and I don't have to do weekends or night shifts unless I want to. And so I'm slowly coming to terms with it, and I'm learning a bit more about myself each day in terms of what I like and what I don't like, spending more time with myself, and I'm learning so much, which actually is so powerful. So I'm definitely on a journey, and I'm hoping that people who are coming through the same process, whether you're a medical student or somebody in a high functioning job that feels like they can't have this life outside, actually showing that you can. And I think obviously having the content creation side has also allowed me to have that flexibility, which I'm super grateful for. And it allows me to kind of have that creative outlet. So yeah, I feel like at the moment I've got a really good balance, and I'm just very fortunate. I kind of count my lucky stars each day.
Yeah, and but I also think in the same breath, just as someone who's sort of lived this journey a little bit in a, as I said, a completely different way. I work in entertainment and TV. It's not the same as helping patients on a day-to-day basis. But that stepping away and that carving and then being like, wait, this is actually doable, like feeling like a fraud, and also being like, why aren't more people doing it? I think that fear of kind of stepping out of what you see all around you and how much we should all be quote unquote suffering. It's like, it works for some people, that structure completely works, but it doesn't mean that it works for everyone. So yeah, I just think it's amazing that you're kind of showing that there is another alternative. And we know the system is stretched. People listening have very, very regular touch points with the medical world and the NHS in the UK. So yeah, I just think it's fantastic that you're showing that that is possible, and also kind of the process of it as well, because it is a bit like shaky, isn't it? It's not, oh, well, I'm going to go and do it this way and that's it. You're sort of like, okay, it feels a bit this way and then maybe a bit that way, and I've done too much over there, so we're going to pull back over here. Is that something you've kind of found as you've gone on this path?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. But yeah, I think every day I'm learning something new, whether I feel like, I'm missing clinics sometimes, or I want to kind of keep on top of my clinical acumen by doing more clinics one week than another. So I feel like I am learning, and there are so many opportunities, especially when it comes to kind of content creation, and opportunities that I never dreamt of having, speaking at panels, coming on podcasts, speaking to yourself, like learning from so many other people, I think has been really valuable. So I'm kind of at the moment feel like I'm a bit of a sponge. I'm just soaking everything up that I'm kind of interacting with and learning in the process.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so probably should have started with this one, but we'll go in now. I'd love just in your words for you to tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and who you are, I guess. Yeah, just a little bit of background.
So I am an NHS GP. I became a GP kind of 2-ish years ago now, just under 2 years ago, but I've been a doctor for about 8 years. Um, and it feels odd because even though I say that I'm not defined by my job, I kind of start by saying that that's what I am, because I feel like for a large part of my life that has and is my identity. That's what I do. I'm a GP. I love helping people, and I feel like that's kind of carried through on terms of the content creation side. So the reason why I started social media was to help kind of one person, and originally started it about 5 years ago, not really being consistent with it, but it was mostly to promote kind of healthy lifestyle and healthy living for people who um, may have, conditions like heart disease, increased risk of stroke. So I am South Asian, and but that's prevalent and higher actually in the South Asian community. And I didn't really see anybody that looked like myself online, and so I kind of wanted to be that person that someone could relate to. But then over time, obviously, as I evolved and as I went through my medical journey and became a GP, then my content kind of evolved into what it is now. So yeah, I guess I am a GP, but I also am striving for the mental well-being of fellow doctors, but other healthcare professionals, and trying to kind of change the narrative in knowing that you can have a work-life balance.
And can you describe a little bit for me what you found being within the system, if you like? Because as I
Mm,
mentioned, everyone listening is listening because they're connected in some way to type 1 diabetes, which is
mhm.
obviously a chronic condition, and that doesn't mean they don't also have other touch points with the system for other reasons. But just in the sense of really telling us from within what you saw among your peers and your colleagues in terms of their own health and well-being, and this drive and this motivation to want to help others as much as possible, but trying to balance that with your own health needs, and trying to serve everyone from all sides, including yourself.
Yeah, I think it's really tough, because I think that when I started as a medical trainee, so as like a medical student, but even as a resident doctor, we didn't really speak about well-being as much. And I think, you know, we're on a rota, and that rota has, normal days where it's like 9 till 5, then you'll have on-call shifts which are 12 hours, and then you'll have night shifts which can be kind of 12 to 13 hours. So I feel like that shift work mentality was kind of ingrained in us from right at the beginning. And that means that obviously you are sacrificing certain aspects of your life, whether it's, your sleep or big life events or whatever it may be, time with your friends, time with your family. And I think only maybe after COVID, I've realized that there's been a slight shift in the narrative within the NHS that maybe we should be prioritizing our well-being, because I feel like healthcare professionals are we see a lot, and I think we see a lot of trauma. We deal with a lot of stress. We deal with a lot of high risk decision making, and I think over time that can really impact you. And I think, to this day it will still impact me in certain ways. Things that I've seen during COVID, but also the day-to-day decisions that I make, and I always second guess and question myself. Within 10 minutes, have I made that right decision? I made that decision to send that patient home, but at 3 a.m. last night, I was awake thinking, oh, should I have done something else, or I hope they're okay? And I think that over time builds up, and I think that can really impact your mental health. So I think the narrative within the NHS is changing, but the actual job is still demanding, and it is high risk. And I think it's about how we can manage that better for everyone involved.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. Really appreciate you sharing that. You actually also have a link to type 1 diabetes, don't you? Which I didn't
Yeah,
realize when I reached out. So do you want to
yeah.
tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's probably the reason why I wanted to do medicine. So my sister, she's kind of 3.5 years older. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 5. And so being a younger sibling, her and my mum actually managing that condition is all I ever remember. And she, as you know, especially as a child, you're going back and forth between hospitals, specialists, GPs. And at that time, we didn't have the sensors like they are now, or the pumps. So my mum was kind of finger pricking, and I distinctly remember it. And I used to feel like I didn't want to have her feel left out. So my mum would like prick her finger and then prick my finger as well, just so that
Oh,
it was like a sense of community. And I think I am really in awe with people who it's making me a little bit emotional, but I'm really in awe of people who have chronic health conditions, especially from a young age, because I feel like it demands so much maturity from you as a person. And I feel like, my sister and my mum handled it with such grace. My sister had to make so many sacrifices within her life in terms of, exercising and, swimming at that time and, just doing so many adjustments to a child's life, which is really, really tough. And I think seeing how healthcare had impacted her in such a positive way kind of inspired me to want to do that for someone's sister or someone's sibling or someone's daughter. And so I think that carried throughout my kind of adolescence and my education. And I think my sister is also a doctor, but I distinctly remember her telling me, oh, it's really hard, Mon, like just don't do it, pick another career. And I was like, no, someone has made your life so much easier and they've helped you so much, and I kind of want to do that for someone else. So yeah, type 1 diabetes has a special place in my heart. I actually did a BSc during my medical career in endocrinology with a view that I wanted to kind of
oh wow.
cure type 1 diabetes. And obviously endocrinology, and hormones has always had a safe spot in my heart, especially diabetes. So yeah, I have a very close connection to it, and I admire anyone, who has a chronic condition, especially type 1 diabetes, which requires so much thought every single day.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so powerful how that's kind of shaped the trajectory of your life and your mum as well. Like speaking there as, with a childhood diagnosis and you being in that team and kind of forcing, I think from my perspective, it does force you to confront sides of yourself that you maybe otherwise wouldn't. And to do
Mm.
that as a 5-year-old, as an 8-year-old, as a 14-year-old, but also as a parent on behalf, these worries that you carry for your child, like
Mm.
it is a lot. And I'm sure you've, I think going into a medical appointment and feeling like you can just breathe and exhale and it's not this judgment and it's not like, what are you doing right? What are you doing wrong? Like, you know, beyond those kind of questions, once you get through anything, any kind of hesitancy that you have around it, those people, which, I can absolutely imagine this is kind of how you interact with your patients, like that unlocking of, oh, okay, there are things I can do. This can be better, or okay, someone's with me on this. It's not just me. Like that's an incredible thing. So it's
Mm.
very powerful to hear you speak like that.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. No, I think it's about understanding, truly empathizing with the patient and understanding that if this was me, that I would really struggle if I had to prick my finger multiple times a day or inject myself with insulin, or even now, checking a sensor or using my insulin pump. I think it's courageous and it's very brave of people who manage chronic conditions themselves. And I think it's important to remember and remember how health is such a privilege. I touch wood, I'm healthy, and I feel like we often forget that it's a privilege to be healthy.
Yeah, there's this amazing quote. It's health is a crown that only the well wear, but only the sick can see, or something like that.
Mm.
And I just think that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? So speaking of endocrinology and hormones, I did want to focus a little bit on cortisol today. Because it does come up a lot in the conversations I have. And like, I'm so aware personally of stress kind of impacting my glucose levels. I can see it now. I have the data. But I also feel like cortisol's having a bit of a moment, like it's the avocado on toast of 2025 or something. It's everywhere online. Nervous system regulation, and you need to lower your cortisol. So I'd love to just start first of all with what actually is cortisol?
So cortisol is a hormone, and it's produced by our adrenal glands, and they're little glands that sit just above the kidneys. It is famously known as the stress hormone, but there are so many other kind of roles of cortisol. So in terms of your sleep-wake cycle, blood pressure regulation, blood sugar and metabolism, immune function, and also it's involved in so many inflammatory pathways. But I feel like you're right. It's really having its moment at the moment where everyone is like, oh my God, you're stressed, you've got cortisol face. And it's crazy because sometimes, obviously, being online and being a healthcare professional, you see how misinformation just travels so quickly. So, yeah, I think it's really important to kind of break down exactly what it is, and kind of debunk any myths out there.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. We're in exactly the right place. I'm so happy to get into this. Because yeah, it's just a word that gets thrown around a lot. So cortisol face, is it a thing? Like, what is that when people talk about that?
Yeah, so when you have excess cortisol, when we learn about it in medical school and kind of in our jobs, usually people who are given exogenous steroids, so people who need steroids for, a certain condition over a long period of time, can develop, cortisol features. So that can be kind of having around the face, it can be having kind of fat in different areas of the body. But I think, at the moment, people are kind of just attributing round faces to excess cortisol. And I think what's really important is to understand the fundamentals of cortisol, kind of what its function is within the body and how it's regulated, and then understanding your own body. So obviously, everybody is different, everybody's stresses are different. But if we look at cortisol, it's actually part of a really complex kind of messaging pathway. So we have what we call our hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis. So it's kind of how our brain talks to our adrenal glands to produce cortisol. Now, it works and talks to each other all the time. So your cortisol is always in kind of like a balance, and it's always fluctuating depending on external stresses or, environmental factors that you're perceiving. So, say back in the day, you were out on the road or maybe in the jungle and you saw a tiger, your brain would perceive that as, oh my God, that's a tiger and a potential threat. Therefore, this is a stressful situation. And so it will signal for your brain to release a hormone from the hypothalamus. It will then cause your pituitary to release a hormone. And then that will impact your adrenals and say, hey, adrenals, we need some cortisol so we can run away from this tiger. And then your cortisol is released. And that's what we call kind of an acute stress, because once the tiger goes away, your body realizes you're in a safe environment, and then that cortisol will talk back to your brain and say, okay, we've got enough in the system now, the stress is gone, so let's just calm down. I think what's happening now is that in this day and age, the tiger has been replaced by work or
Mm.
life stresses. And I think acute stress is important for the body because that's what's going to allow you to run away from, tigers or whatever stress you may have. But it's the chronic stress within this day and age, which is what we worry about. Because if you're having elevated levels of cortisol for a long period of time, that's when you can get kind of issues in terms of your health and well-being, and it can manifest into medical conditions.
Okay, so is there an optimal level of cortisol in terms of it giving and receiving these messages, and what can happen if it does get too high on an
Yeah,
ongoing basis?
so we spoke about this kind of brain and adrenal axis, but if you look at your 24-hour day, your cortisol also has its own kind of cycle. So we call that your circadian rhythm or your sleep wake cycle. So ideally, your cortisol tends to start rising at about 3 a.m. in the morning, and usually peaks, depending on the individual, but between like 6 and 8 a.m. And that cortisol rising will allow you to be kind of alert. So it primes your alertness upon waking, it gives you kind of some energy, and then also the stimuli around you, so kind of morning light, that will help you wake up as well and kind of support that cortisol to rise. And then what happens is you kind of peaks, and then slowly during the day, it will start dripping off and kind of goes into a trough around about midnight. But, as it's going down towards the end of the day, then your sleep hormone, so your melatonin starts to rise, and that allows you to kind of sleep. So your cortisol naturally is going to rise in the beginning of of the day, and that's helpful. That's what we want. Whether there's an optimal level, I guess there's no kind of number that you're going to put on it. I guess what it is that you're supporting that natural rise in the morning and allowing it to fall. So say if you're in bed and you are consuming a lot of kind of blue light from your phone, or you are stressed because you're thinking about lots of different things, it may then ask your adrenals to produce more cortisol. So therefore, you're not really facilitating that natural decline. You're actually causing a bit of a cortisol spike. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's like an optimal level, but it's about understanding that your cortisol is naturally going to increase in the morning, drop, and then your melatonin rises. And it's about supporting that and thinking about your environment to allow you to support that to happen.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is cortisol is good in when it's functioning properly. We absolutely need it. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Cortisol isn't the enemy, and I think that's the one thing to understand is that cortisol gets a bad rep, but actually it's not the enemy. It's the dysregulation of it that is the cause of the issue.
Okay, so there are things that we are potentially doing in our world, in our lifestyles, in our stresses of living in the present that are disrupting this natural rhythm of this hormone.
Yeah,
And then I guess as it pertains to other hormones, like I've never understood. I mean, it took me a long time to realize slash understand slash learn that insulin, as someone with type 1 diabetes, is also a hormone,
yeah.
and that there are lots more hormones in the body. So my question to you is, do you know how many, sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, how many hormones we have in our body, but also do they all interact with each other in some way?
I think there's about over 50, and they're what we call chemical messengers. So hormones are essentially chemical messengers, and some of them work on the same axis. So if you think about the hypothalamus and the pituitary, you'll have your kind of higher up or like brain hormones, or neurotransmitters, or whatever you'd like to call them, messengers, and then they will work. So you have the brain, and then if you think about all your endocrine glands, so you have your thyroid, you have your adrenals, you have your kidneys, which secrete some hormones, you have your ovaries if you're a woman, you have your testes if you're a man. And so if you think about it, your pancreas, if everyone has a pancreas, so your brain is talking, sending out messages, specific messages to all these different glands around your body to say, okay, we need a constant level of what we call a homeostasis in medicine, so a balance. How are we going to achieve that? So if you think about it, your surroundings will always impact that balance. So, say if you eat, I don't know, a donut, your pancreas is obviously going to try and release as much insulin as possible to bring that glucose level down. But what you're doing is going to impact how your hormones are released and how they are communicating with each other to do that. And yeah, so cortisol obviously is just one of many. And I think that's the message that I'm seeing online is that, like, obviously cortisol is having its moment, but there are so many other hormones which play so many other factors, and they all talk to each other. And I think you can't just isolate one hormone and say you need to regulate your cortisol, because actually, in all honesty, it's actually about looking at your pillars of health throughout your whole kind of life, right? So your sleep, your nutrition, movement, mental health. Like, there's so many things that we should really be focusing on rather than demonizing one hormone.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing there is like, due to the way they interplay with each other, that if you take these broader kind of things rather than really micro focusing and potentially demonizing something that we actually need, it potentially could be more beneficial because it will seep into this homeostasis that you speak
Mm.
of. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually looking at your body as a whole rather than treating it as like car parts, I think. Like, you obviously are the vehicle, your body is a vehicle, but I think in order for everything, in order for the car to function, everything needs to be working and in balance. And I think if you're just focusing on one aspect, I think you're going to miss out a lot of the rest of the care. And I think we really do need to take a holistic approach in managing our well-being rather than just focusing on one aspect. I would actually look at the bigger picture, which I think I mean, it's obviously harder questions arise when you look at the bigger picture, right? Because it can feel like a mountain of things that you need to change. But I would always say just to start small by one thing, like 1% better each day is kind of what I try to live by.
I'd like to get into that a little bit, like where to start. But first, just to because you mentioned circadian rhythm and waking
Mm,
cortisol, a lot of people with type 1 diabetes experience a blood sugar spike first thing in the morning.
mm,
And my understanding is that that's like the body preparing itself to spring into action for the day, and we want those
Mm,
awake signals, and we want to start to be more alert and step out of that sleep kind of feeling. So
mm.
where is the cortisol sitting within that in relation to how our blood sugars can spike in that foot to floor kind of way? As soon as we wake up and start moving, we get a bit of a blood glucose spike.
Yeah, so if your cortisol is higher, obviously in the morning, then it can stimulate kind of gluconeogenesis, which is basically when you're getting more kind of glucose production. And that can cause a slightly higher blood sugar level. And I guess you see it because your pancreas isn't secreting the insulin behind the radar, which is what mine is doing. So obviously, I won't know that my blood glucose is spiking because my
Mm.
insulin should be doing the job. Whereas obviously in type 1, when you have little or no insulin production, you're obviously knowing that because you can see the reading and then having to give yourself insulin. And I think it's tough because I think regulating that is quite difficult because obviously the insulin in the pancreas is not doing the job. But I think it's about controlling other aspects in the morning that you can do to help kind of not add stress in the morning, if that makes sense. So if it's going for a morning walk to try and stimulate or tap into kind of the more calming side of the nervous system, or whether it's, it would be dependent actually, but if you're into breath work or journaling or taking something back to try and calm the body down. And I think, yeah, it's harder because obviously cortisol and blood sugar production are so interlinked. That's like one of the main functions of it. And obviously having type 1 and not having your own insulin production, you're obviously noticing that sugar is going to be raised. But it's about trying to manage that, again, I would say, from a holistic approach.
Yeah, which is music to my ears, because I think for a long time the understanding, as it was told to me, and gratefully the thinking has changed now, is have this food, take this insulin, and you will get these results. And it's like, it just doesn't work like
Mm.
that. That's just not how bodies, hormones, humans, certainly this one works.
Exactly. And I think, think about life stresses. Say if you have a family and you're trying to get your kids ready in the morning, and they're not listening, and then you're going to say, please get ready. And then so you're naturally, your stress hormone is going to be high. Your stress levels are going to be high because you're stressed in the morning. So I think there's so many factors. I think rather than, again, saying you must eat X and then inject yourself with X, and this is why your sugar is high. I think it's about understanding what can I do for me as a human being to help in the morning and make my mornings a bit more digestible.
This episode of Type 101 is sponsored by Dexcom. Using Dexcom CGM has given me so much confidence to make informed diabetes treatment decisions in the moment. You can choose to wear it on your arm or your abdomen, which is so great to give those sites a break. And all Dexcom CGMs have the share and follow feature, even when connected to an insulin pump. So your family and friends can see your glucose levels and get alerts, giving that extra bit of support when needed. Head to dexcom.com to request your free Dexcom One Plus sample. Always read the user manual for important product aspect and limitations. Talk to your doctor for diabetes management terms and conditions and terms of use. So you've said morning. Is it particularly in the morning that we may benefit the most from setting up these kind of a bit more space, a bit more time, or some little things, habits, routines, in terms of trying to make sure that cortisol level isn't immediately spiking and staying there? Is the morning kind of the most opportune and optimal time to put things in place?
I think it's person dependent. I think it depends on what your day looks like. When I was doing shift work, I didn't really have a morning. Doing a night shift, my morning was my evening, and everything was out of whack. And I really felt that actually because I was fighting against my body's natural rhythm, and I think that was a real struggle. And I think some people aren't morning people, and that's also fine. But I'm kind of a creature of habit and a creature of routine, and I feel like I have a few things that I do for myself in the morning that keeps me kind of grounded. But obviously, your cortisol is going to be high in the morning. That's what we want. It's about trying to then manage your stress throughout the day. So you're allowing it to drop rather than going up and down, or having that chronic level of stress for a long period of time. So I think if you are a morning person, you like a good morning routine, then that will definitely work for you. But it's also about understanding and listening to the cues of your body. If you're finding yourself stressed throughout the day and it's kind of every day you're feeling like this, that's when we kind of need to be taking a step back and understanding what we can do to try and reduce that.
Yeah, I absolutely want to get into that, because I think that's where I was at for a very long time without actually realizing, rather than these like very acute moments where it's very clear that there's a tiger or a figurative
A
tiger.
deadline.
Yeah, exactly. Versus this low level, okay, I've got all this noise in my life and actually it's just what I've always done and I'm not even aware of it. But over time, that's having an impact on my health. But before we come back to that, let's stick to the morning. So if someone is looking to start to make changes, because I don't know, as someone with a chronic health condition, for a little while, it's a bit like, oh yeah, writing a few lines in a diary. Oh yeah, having my like 15 minutes to sit, that's not going to help when I'm dealing with this beast of a condition. But actually having now implemented a few things, I'm like, oh yeah, this does work. So if you could kind of chat to me a little bit about what you might suggest for someone looking to start with a few habits in the morning to try and set up their day as optimally as possible in relation to stress and their hormones.
Yeah, I think firstly, habits are going to be really person specific. And I think one of the questions I ask myself, before I established this morning routine was like, what if I was living my best version of myself, what would her morning routine look like? Like, what would she do to set herself up for success? And again, it will look completely different to different people because, people's priorities are different. People have families, they have lots of other kind of external circumstances which will impact this view of what you want your morning routine to look like. And so I think for me, what I was finding before I established my morning routine was that I was waking up in the morning, my phone was by my bedside, and I went into work mode like straight away. So I would grab my phone, snooze my alarm, either snooze it and stay in bed, or I would stop it and then open up my emails, open up my social media. Then I would read negative comments, and then it would get me into a bit of a spiral. And I'd start my day on a really negative note. And I could feel that I was overwhelmed. My heart was racing. I felt jittery. I was like fidgety. I was irritable. And it wasn't even 9 a.m. And I was like, well, this isn't the best version of myself. This isn't what I would want for her. This is not what her morning routine would be. And so now over time, I've kind of implemented things bit by bit and slowly over time built something that seems like a good morning routine, which on most days I do. I wouldn't say I do it every single day, but it's something that I can fall back on the days where I feel like I need a system. And so I don't look at my phone for kind of the first 30 minutes of the day. I try and go out for a morning walk multiple times a week. So if it allows it, depending on my kind of start times of clinic, but even if it's a 15-minute walk just out in the nature, listening to the birds and just having some silence, that I feel like does me wonders. If it's, taking my vitamins in the morning, so I know that I've remembered to do it because I know I won't do it at the end of the day. Setting myself up with like a nice breakfast. So if I prep it the night before, if I know what I'm having, so I know that I'm doing things for myself before I go into clinic and feel like I give myself to a lot of people, or I take on a lot of other people's stresses and burdens. So I feel like if I can do something or one or two things for myself in the morning, that's great. But yeah, I was the same as you. I thought, what's writing a few lines in a journal going to do for me? Wonders. Actually being able to
Truly.
self-reflect and
Yeah.
and you start the day and you think, okay, what's my current mood? And my current mood would be, I don't know, sometimes it can be, demotivated. And then I'd write why I felt demotivated and then what my goals were for the day. And all of a sudden I had motivation. And I was thinking to myself, if I hadn't taken this time to reflect, I would never have even processed how I was feeling because I just wouldn't have had time to. So I think, journaling isn't for everyone, but I always say, like, if you try it and you don't like it, that's fine. At least you've tried it.
Yeah, 100%. I've taken to like a couple of lines in the morning, just why today will be amazing.
Mm,
And because like as someone with type 1 diabetes, like just speaking specifically with the audience in mind, and it might just be me. I don't think it is, but we have all these swirling like things that, what am I doing now? What am I doing in 2 hours' time? Do I need to lower my insulin to account for that? Like, am I running high in general today? Have I got a stressful meeting? Have I slept? Like, I know that everyone in the world has those thoughts, but as with the extra layer of type 1 on top,
Mm,
like it's just a swirl, like quite constant. So in the morning, if I write literally 2 reasons why today will be amazing, and then I look back and it's like, oh yeah, I did actually speak to my sister-in-law, and oh yeah, the sun was shining. Like, they're so small, but then when I go to bed, I'm like looking at maybe some things that went right. Because with type 1 diabetes, I do feel like, you only get the alarms now, and I'm so grateful for those alarms, but you get the alarms to tell you that something isn't as it should be. So a
mm,
lot of the information that we're presented with is often trying to fight those fires in terms of keeping our health on track. And it can be easy to lose track of the rest of the day where there were no alarms, because things were as they should be. So I
yeah.
think for me, just to kind of, I don't know if this helps anyone or not, but it has enabled me to extract some of those thoughts that are swirling a lot, and b, sort of focus a bit more on what went right, as opposed to just having that constant reminder of what's not
Mm.
going to plan.
And you're right. I think, having a chronic condition, especially something like type 1 diabetes, it's impacting every pillar of your life. So if you haven't slept well the night before, it will impact your next day. If you don't eat within a certain time frame, it will impact your mood, your concentration. It will impact your mental health, because you think, why didn't I eat? If I ate eaten on time, then this wouldn't be happening. And I think you're right. There's so much forward thinking that you have to do, and it doesn't actually allow you to just say, wow, like, I have managed this condition for so long. I am doing a really good job, and I should actually give myself a pat on the back. What you're doing is amazing, having that constant regulation of, what am I eating? How many carbs am I eating? How much insulin do I need to give myself? Should I exercise? Will that drop my glucose lower? Do I need to eat something before I exercise? And if I do, then I have to wait 2 hours before I can, unless I get a stitch. There's so many
Mm.
factors that you have to think about, which for someone who has a functioning pancreas, it doesn't even cross my mind, that my pancreas is doing all the hard work and I don't even have to do any thinking, and you have to do a normal day to day and the extra thinking on top. So yeah, absolute credit to anybody, because I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, but again, I think, like, coming back to this sort of topic of stress and stuff, and I think it's made me very aware of the stresses. Like, because we have the data now, I can see when things aren't serving me properly, because my blood sugars are telling me. And I used to
Mm,
think that was like the end point of the thing, like the outcome, but actually it was a symptom of something else that was going on in my life. And that has kind of allowed me, I guess, to question what is in my life, what is superfluous, what I'm overarching or overstretching on, for other people, where actually
mm,
that's something I need to kind of rein back for myself.
mm,
So to talk about that kind of low level, ongoing kind of raised cortisol through the day. So we've spoken about how it should, like, it will raise in the morning to get us going, and then steadily drop. But a lot of lifestyle factors now are kind of interrupting that rhythm. Um,
mm.
what are you seeing in terms of people coming in with this kind of chronic lifestyle of stress, I guess? And then two,
Mm.
is there anything you can offer in terms of people navigating just the whole washing machine of life, and whether
Yeah.
we can bring ourselves into awareness a bit more, even about
Mm.
whether we might be running on a bit of a cortisol kind of a cortisol level that isn't helpful.
Yeah, I think I am definitely seeing chronic stress more and more, or the effects of chronic stress more and more in my clinic. And I think, you know, you are seeing young people who are having conditions like high blood pressure or anxiety, or, you know, um, a weakened immune system. So they're getting recurrent infections because they are dealing with so much. And I think within medicine, so when you train to be a doctor, it's all about kind of treatment. And so you see a problem and then you give a treatment. And so what I'm trying to really do with these patients is actually say, well, how can we change the system so that we're trying to prevent this from happening in the future? And so it's kind of trying to reinforce ways in which you can reduce that perceived stress in your environment. And again, it will be patient specific, but it's about, again, going back to those fundamental pillars. So things like your sleep, your nutrition, your movement, your mental health, all those things I think will help. And it's not going to be a quick overnight fix. And I think that's what's really important to say, is that often when you go and see a GP, you go with a problem and you expect to have a treatment for that problem within that consultation. And yes, for some things it might be, but I think when it comes to chronic stress, we have to go a little bit deeper than that and actually make it really personalized for that person so that they will stick to it and hopefully change their surroundings so that it's not going to cause them long-term issues in the future.
Okay, that's really helpful. So I think if someone is like, oh yeah, but it's just my life, it's just life, like I haven't, would you suggest or advise that people go and talk to someone? Like, what would be the advice there?
Yeah, I think if you find that you can't think of ways in which you can reduce that stress that you're perceiving or you're having in your life, I think definitely speaking to a healthcare professional would be useful, because even just speaking to someone can do so much good. I think allowing yourself to vent and say, this is what my life is like, I don't even know where to start, because actually somebody as an external person looking in might be able to give you some ways in which you can, because I think once you're in it and you're kind of feeling like you're sinking, it's really hard to see a way out. Whereas someone like me or a healthcare professional can help pull you out from the outside. So I think speaking to someone is really important. Also for your mental health, I think if you ever feel like you're waking up on days and you think, oh, I just feel a bit low, anyone speaking to a family, a friend, healthcare professional, I think speaking can do such a world of good. So yeah, actually consulting a healthcare professional, number one. But then number two, I always just try and say, like, if there's one thing I want to achieve today, or one thing I want to do for myself, or one thing I want to improve, what would it be? And if it's, I want to eat a more nutritious breakfast, done. I actually want to get 8 hours of sleep tonight because I'm running on about 5, done. Go to bed a bit earlier. Or if you want to go for a walk or try a new class or do a bit of movement, done. But it doesn't have to be everything in one go. It's just little by little.
Yeah, and they're all like quite delicious things. Well, they sound quite delicious to me. I'm like, that sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned sleep there. I just always find it so endlessly fascinating that it's something that we really don't give a lot of priority to. But over the eons of times that humans have been in existence, it's something we haven't evolved out of. So it's clearly very important.
Yeah.
Can you speak just a little bit to someone who is like, it's a bit contradictory, I think, with type 1, because we need the alarms to wake ourselves up. And fortunately, the tech is such now that I have so few alarms overnight due to the kind of insulin pump that I'm on, which has just been an absolutely incredible lease of life, to be honest, an absolute game changer. But in terms of prioritizing sleep and then seeing that play out in my glucose levels the next day, is that related to cortisol? If I've got a good night's sleep, I do feel like my glucose levels are a lot more stable or like just steadier to start with. Is that to do with like human hormone stress? Like what's happening there?
Well, I think if you're having a good night's sleep, your body is recovering, right? So I feel like you're when you sleep, I think a lot of people just think that you like shut off. And actually, your body does so much in your sleep in terms of like recovery, and talks to each other and says, okay, this person's asleep, so we can do X, Y, and Z. That's how I like to think of it anyway. But I think that's, you have hopefully, no external things happening to you. You're just there, passed out, relaxing, hopefully. And so your body's able to do what it needs to do to allow you to then wake up and function the next day. And I think when that's interrupted, that's when we really feel it. And you will feel it in all pillars again. So you will be irritable, you'll be tired, you'll be, your recovery won't be there. You may make poorer decisions in terms of exercising or nutrition because you're tired. And I think, again, that's something that I really valued when I was doing night shifts because my my rhythm was out of whack. So I would, start a shift at 8:30 p.m. and then I would finish at about 9:30 if it ran over. I would then walk home in the broad daylight, delirious, get home and not remember how I walked home because it was just like a fog. And then I would go to bed, sleep for about 3 hours, and then be expected to do it again. And I feel like that for me, I really understood the true value of sleep in terms of recovery. And so I think, yeah, understanding your own metrics, so your own body and how it functions, because everybody needs a different amount of sleep. Everybody will be, um, responding to stimuli before bed differently. But I think it's about having those pillars. So before bed, what are you doing to give yourself the best chance to sleep? Are you on your phone? Are you kind of watching TV? Or are you doing a brain dump and reading a book or listening to high, like sleep frequencies that will help or hinder kind of how you then go into that sleep cycle? So sleep is really important, and I think we underestimate it because I think we've perceived that we're not doing much, but actually there's a lot of internal work that goes on when we're asleep.
Yeah, incredible. And just touching on that a bit more, I joked there about, oh, that all sounds delicious. What would you say to someone who thinks, well, actually, that sounds delicious, but maybe they're struggling to make space for their own health because they're busy taking care of other people, or, it sounds kind of luxurious or indulgent. What would you say to someone who would kind of struggle with stepping into trusting what they need for their health and to help themselves?
I think it's hard. I think we sometimes are a bit harsh on ourselves when we try to prioritize ourselves. I think we think that we shouldn't be prioritizing ourselves because it seems that we're being indulgent or overindulgent. But I actually, being a healthcare professional and seeing how negative lifestyle choices can really impact your health, I I would say that it is not indulgent to prioritize your own health. I think actually you are doing your future self so much good. And I think it's okay to be selfish when it comes to your own health, because honestly, seeing people who I work in like a not so privileged area, and I think I have only now realized how privileged I am in having the health education that I've had, in knowing that eating well, moving and sleeping and prioritizing my mental well-being, how valuable that is, because I see people who haven't had that, who haven't had the access to that education, who then make lifestyle choices because they don't know any better, and then, end up having so many health problems at such a young age, and now it's really impacting their life. So it may seem like you're selfish, and it may seem like you're, being overindulgent, and that, you shouldn't be doing that. But I would absolutely say you deserve to look after yourself. I think, you have this one body, this one life, this one mind. And so you absolutely deserve to look after it. And if that's doing something for yourself, then so be it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm obviously not a medical professional and only a sample of one, and I have said this before, but being a bit more boundaried once I came to understand the needs of my health and how much I needed to give to my diabetes that I wasn't or hadn't done in the past, coming to the place now where I'm at and having built a life that is more autonomous and does serve the needs of my health as and when they strike, because they do sometimes just come out of nowhere.
Mm.
I've seen that affect everyone around me. It's how I show up at work. It's how I show up for my family. It's, kind of who I am when I interact with this stranger in the coffee shop downstairs. Like, I see that kind of ripple out. So yeah, just
Mm.
to kind of build on that. And I don't know if something that if it's something that you found having kind of done a bit of this for yourself as well.
Absolutely. And I think, looking back and comparing who I was when I didn't prioritize myself versus who I am now, I I guess hindsight is obviously so useful, but I really feel like I have started to understand myself. And it's crazy because, over 30, I'm over 30 and I've only now really
Mm.
trying to understand myself. But I think, yeah, it's so important. And I think doing something for yourself, and I know when I've done this, I'm like kinder to my patients. I can feel it. I start the day on a positive note. I'm nicer as a person, and I want to be that person for them. I want to be that person that is well rested, that takes care of themselves, because I'm nicer to them, but I also want to feel like I'm a role model. I don't want them to look at me and be like, well, you don't look after yourself, so why should I listen to you? So yeah, I think it is really important. And I've only realized now, looking back, when I didn't prioritize myself, I was kind of doing myself a disservice.
Powerful. Okay. And could we touch a little bit on stigma and judgment? Because I think that is something that can potentially also be a source of extra stress for a lot of people when it comes to health conditions, taking care of yourself, advocating for yourself. What's
Mm.
your experience of that, or how does this kind of present itself with the people that you see?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think obviously each person will have their own cultural beliefs, kind of beliefs within society that will shape their health beliefs. And I think where I kind of work, uh, there's kind of two ends of the spectrum. There are people who will put off seeing a doctor for as long as possible and then present at a really late stage, and then there are some people who kind of see the doctor for everything and anything. And I think there's no right or wrong. I think you need to do what you feel comfortable with, but I think the stigma and the judgment is can be kind of detrimental to your own health in terms of you're putting it off for a really long period of time. I think also having chronic health conditions, we know that as a society, we are only just learning about some chronic health conditions, truly. And I think it's about, for me, when I see, and maybe it's because of the experience that I've had with my sister, but I think I really do empathize with people who have chronic conditions, because again, it makes me understand my privilege in terms of my own health. But having someone so close to me go through it firsthand, it's it gives you a new lens. And I think it's a shame that there is stigma and judgment out there, but hopefully, especially with podcasts like this where you're empowering people who have type 1 diabetes and you're educating them, I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. And I think, 10 years ago, if I said to my sister, oh, did you know there's a podcast, the podcast says type 1 diabetes and she speaks about type 1 diabetes, she'd be like, no way. That like doesn't even exist. And now here we are openly talking about it. And I think conversations like this are so important. So I think you're actually doing a really great job.
Oh, that's so generous. Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there differences between men and women in terms of how we're affected by cortisol, the impact cortisol has?
So one of the things just to consider is that women aren't small men, and I think for years, in terms of research, women weren't really included in research because we were seen as kind of like too complex. And I think now, slowly, the narrative is changing. We have a lot of a way to go. I think we're only just scratching the surface. But I think in terms of cortisol, and if we take our understanding of hormones from this conversation, men are kind of on a 24-hour cycle. So they'll wake up the next day, clock starts at 0, and then Tuesday, clock starts at 0, and it's like a very 24-hour cycle. But I think if you look at women, we are at, anywhere from 21 days to 35 days to even more or even less. And so if you think about all those hormones that are fluctuating within that time frame, how it's communicating, I think, yeah, it will be different because we're not going to be a spring chicken at 9 a.m. the next day, like men.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It absolutely fascinates me how relatively, like, completely recent, including women in any kind of clinical trials is.
it's crazy because in medical school now, when I look back and I think about, we get taught about pattern recognition. So if a patient presents with chest pain that radiates down the left arm, goes up to the jaw, it's a heart attack. That's how men presented in that study for a heart attack. And now, being a GP, I have seen women who have heart attacks who don't present with central crushing chest pain and left-sided arm and jaw. If anything, it feels like they have a bit of like gastritis, or sometimes they can have completely different symptoms. And so it's crazy because I'm also almost questioning things that I've learned and saying, well, is it because that's how a man presented with it in the study and that's what we are taught in the textbooks versus women? So yeah, I mean, we have a long way to go, but I think having insight and knowing that, it's just starting is also really important, because then you can be aware of kind of gaps within our knowledge and our research.
Yeah. Wow. With the kind of stresses of life and this work that you're doing, and I want to reflect that back at you, like you're helping so many people, not only in your day to day, but this content and having this conversation with me today. It's sometimes just so validating to hear from someone like yourself that what we're dealing with and the numbers that we're seeing that don't make sense on the CGMs and, what we're handling, like, yeah, it's a lot. And it's just wonderful to know that there are people out there like you who are working in the way that you are and showing that it can be done a different way as well. So I'd just love to hear if there's any sort of parting wisdom that you'd like to give to people just in relation to kind of what we're handling, the stresses of modern life, and kind of, to take some of that pressure off in terms of, stress, cortisol, getting caught up in all of this, being in the mix of it, like we said, not being able to kind of step back from it. Is there anything you'd like to offer?
I think to the listeners, especially obviously the majority of people here, listening that have type 1, I think one of the things I would say is that if anyone hasn't told you today, like, you're doing a great job. And I think it's really, as we mentioned, hard because when you're getting the alarms and you're getting the lows or the highs, you're focusing on the bad things. But I think what's really important is to remember that dealing with this is incredible. And so what you're doing is an amazing job. I think life happens, stress happens, and I think what I want you to focus on is knowing that if you can just focus on one thing that you want to improve, and make yourself 1% better each day, and that's what I live by, that's enough. I think there was a quote that said, if you're functioning at like 40% in the morning and you only give 40% that day, you've actually given 100%. So I think we need to give ourselves a bit of grace as well. I think I myself included, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I think I get into a negative hole very quickly when things don't really go my way. But I think, yeah, giving yourself a bit more grace, and understanding that life is hard sometimes. But I think we're all navigating it and doing a great job. So yeah, if anyone hasn't told you today, your guys are doing great.
Thank you so much. This has been such a valuable conversation. I've learned a lot. Where can people find you if they want to see more about you and see some of this content that's out there?
Yeah, I'm on social media, so kind of Instagram and TikTok under Life with Dr. Mon. So my handle is at Life with Dr. Mon, and then I'm also on YouTube as well, which is just Dr. Monika Sharma. But yeah, happy to interact with anyone. So just send me a message. I always say my DMs are always open.
Yes, and thankfully so, because that is exactly how I approached you to have this conversation today. So thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Type 1 Please remember that nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as medical advice. I'm definitely not a healthcare professional. If you like what you hear, hit subscribe and do leave a little review on iTunes if you have time. It really helps to spread the word about type 1 diabetes. And thank you so much for listening.